Okay, so what we discussed yesterday is the shaila of if Yiud does nusuin or if Yiud is only like an erison, and we were just at the point where the Gemara proved that Yiud does erison, and it was a multi-pronged raya. The raya first started from the brisa that we learned yesterday as well of bevigdoi ba. Rabbi Akiva reads it bevigdoi ba because he married her off, because the father married off the daughter. Once he marries her off, he loses his chus to sell her. So if he marries her off and then her marriage terminates, her husband dies or divorces her, she then comes back to the father's household, but he no longer has the right to be able to sell her. Now, we learned this machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer yesterday, which is going to come back a little bit into play today, where Rabbi Akiva said, once she's married, once someone who was Piris Talisa, he's no longer able to sell her. Rabbi Eliezer learned, since he betrayed her and sold her once, he cannot sell her again. So the machlokes is, once he sells her, can he not sell her again? Or once he marries her off, can he not sell her again? That's how Rashi is goyers. Tosfos actually flips around the script. And one of the things he asks is, it's not typical, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So I'm just going to flip it around and say, Tosfos says that it's Rabbi Akiva who says, Bevog doiba. It's Rabbi Akiva who says that once he sells her, he cannot sell her again. And it's Rabbi Eliezer who says, Bevig doiba. So Tosfos, the Rabbeinu Tam, just switches it around. As we see over here, the Kachnir Rabbeinu Tam, the Gersinon, Kivin Shapiris, Talisala, Divi, Rabbi Eliezer. So he puts Rabbi Eliezer first and then Rabbi Akiva. And therefore, Tosfos says, so one of the problems that Rabbeinu Tam had with Rashi's Girsa is we never quote Rabbi Akiva before Rabbi Eliezer because Rabbi Eliezer was the Rebbe. Now, flipping it around, in fact, we do quote Rabbi Eliezer first. Okay, but that's just an aside. So we have this brisa, Kivin Shapiris Talisela, Shuv Eini Rishai L'Moicha, and we make a diak. Zevuna Yehuda Loimas bin Law. He cannot sell her anymore, but he would be able to marry her off. The problem is, if she had already had Yiud done, because Bevigdei Ba means, the pashtus is, she was an Amma, and then the other married her, which is Yiud, we're still suggesting that the father would be able to marry her off. But if you hold that Yiud accomplishes Nisuin, once a woman is nissus, it's game over for the father. The father never has any schus in her again. Nisuin completely removes her from the schus of the father. So at first, the Gemara start to say that this is the raya that Yiud Ersnoisa. But Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak came up with a chiddush to dodge this kasha, and he said, Hacha b'Kiddushin the almakai. When it says bevigdei ba, it's referring to a man who married his daughter off. We're not even talking about a man who sold his daughter and Yiud was made. He's talking about a man who accepted Kiddushin for her. V'hachi kamar. And this is what Rabbi Eliezer means to say, Rabbi Akiva means to say. Kivin shemasra avuya. Once her father accepts Kiddushin for her and he gives her over to a man, her husband, who's now going to be mechuyev in sheksus v'ayna, shuv ein yachal u'maycha, he can't sell her again. So Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak was machadish a new concept. And the new concept is, up until now we know that Nisuin removes her from her father's domain completely. Now we're learning a new thing, that Kiddushin, but not Kiddushin as a standalone, Kiddushin where the father gave her over L'Shem Kiddushin, because it's since once the father gives her over L'Shem Kiddushin, not that she became Mekudeshes on her own, but the father gave her over L'Shem Kiddushin. Once that happens, his rights in her expire, and he could no longer sell her as an Evet. But that doesn't say that he cannot marry her off. Okay, So with Rav Nachman's Chiddush, which we need to say in order to explain the first brisa that we just learned, so that it shouldn't be a raya that Yiud Eretz Noisa, we're going to go now to the next brisa. And in the next brisa, we're going to have a little bit of a checkmate. Because the next brisa said, Ein moicher lekroivim. You cannot sell an Amma to Kroivim. And we learned the reason is because a Karev would never be able to marry her. There's an Isser Chi of Kares for a Karev to marry this girl. And therefore, you're selling her as an Amma in a situation where it would be impossible to lead to Yiud. And this Tanakama holds that you cannot sell an Amma into a situation where Yiud is impossible. But Rabbi Eliezer disputes that. Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Amru, Moichra lekroivim. He could sell her to Kroivim. It doesn't have to be that you could only sell an Amma to a family where Yiud is possible. You could sell an Amma even to a situation where Yiud is not possible. And this becomes a clincher, which we're going to focus on. Everybody agrees that a father could sell her as an Amma even though she's an Almana. Now the question is, how did this woman become an Almana? She's a little girl. She couldn't have been Mekabel Kiddushin from anybody on her own because a little girl's Kabbalah Kiddushin has no strength to it. It has no value to it. So it must be that he was Mekadosh. He accepted Kiddushin for her. And what does the Brisa say? That the father can sell her as an Almana l'Kohen Gadol, which means he married her off, and then after he married her off, now he's selling her? Did we not just say, did Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak not just say, in order to avoid a raya, that Yiud Eretz Noisa from the earlier brisa, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak had to say that if someone is Mikadosh his daughter, if someone accepts Kedusha for his daughter once, he can no longer sell her. So how is it possible that she's an Almana, meaning she once got married, and now we're suggesting that he could sell her to a Kohen Gadol? He can't sell her to anybody anymore because he's already lost his rights to sell her because he has already married her off. So we're a little bit stuck. So now Rav Amram came in the name of Yitzchak, and in the name of Yitzchak, and he's going to try to bail us out. And he said, he comes up with an unbelievable Kiddush, which we're going to be focusing on more today, and that is that you can have an anomaly. You can have a situation where a Ketana can accept Kiddushin on her own. She can accept it, and it will work. How can a Ketana accept Kiddushin and it should work? Her father, we know, could be Makabel for her. The magic is in Kiddusha Yiud. We know Kiddusha Yiud works because it's dictated by the Torah that it works. And how does Kiddusha Yiud work? Well, according to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, I'll tell you how it works. The conventional wisdom that we've always understood it with is that the original money that the other paid the father for her as a slave, that money transfers and becomes Mois Kedushin. If that's what Yiud is, we'll have to all agree that it's the father who accepted that Kesef Kedushin, because the father accepted payment for her when he sold her. But Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda says that's not how it works at all. That original money has nothing to do with the Kedushin. Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda says a Chiddush, Mois, or Yisraelis Lav, the Kedushin Nitnu. So where's the Kedushin coming from? When he decides at some later point, this Adon decides at some later point, after he bought her, that he wants to make Yiud, she is still owing him servitude, because it was a 6-year contract, so she still owes him some time. That Shibud that she has to him, he's Moichel. So the Hanoah that she has, because he's Moichel, what she owes him, that's the Kesef Kedushin. Well, who's being Mekabel that Kesef Kedushin? Not the father. Father's not there anymore. Father's out of the picture. So obviously she is. So Yiud, according to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, is a tremendous anomaly. You have a Ketana who is now an Amma working for this man, and she's accepting Kedushin in lieu of her having to work. So now we have a case where she would be Mekudeshes, yet her father wasn't Mekadesher. In such a case, if her husband dies and the Adon dies, her father will be able to marry her off again, because her father never married her off in the first place. She married herself off. So I'll leave it to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. I'm a Mois where he showed this love of Kedushin into. Now, well, she goes back to her father. Her father's dying, but her father can no longer sell her as a shofar anymore. That was the chiddush of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. That once he accepted Kiddushin for her once, he can no longer marry her off again. And we learned that from the Vig Doiba. Now that we've seen how this Bryce is understood, the Amrit Nisuin Oisa, if you're going to hold that Yiud makes a Nisuin, then it doesn't matter whether she was Makabal that, whether her father was Makabal that. Nisuin is a catch-all. And once Nisuin happens, she's completely out of her father's Rishos. Kivan Shenisis, Shuv Ein Lavi Rishospa. So because we cannot say Yiud is Nisuin Oisa, because if Yiud is Nisuin Oisa, how could the Brisa discuss him selling her again? It must be that Yiud is Eretz Noisa. And now this is where our raya was that Yiud doesn't make Nisuin, Yiud only makes Eretz. Frag the Gemara, and you think that solves all your problems in life? Once we come, so all your problems melt away. Your problems are just as severe now as they were a moment ago. Because Velamai, Eretz Noisa. You can say Yiud only makes an Eretz. The problem is, the Brisa also says, the Shavin Shemoicha. Everybody agrees that he can sell her as an Alman L'Kohen Gadol. How could he do that? We said once he marries her off, he cannot sell her anymore. What are you going to have to say? Which we have already explained and built it into the chat that we just said, is shiny Erison Dida, Me'erison Davia, right? The whole Chiddush of Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda is that the Erison, the Yiud, is an anomaly. It allows a Ketana to marry herself off. But she married herself off. Since she married herself off, the father still has Rishus to sell her. When do we say the father does not have Rishus to sell her? That's if the father married her off. So Zok to Gemara, why can't you make that same distinction with Nisuin? Afilu Temin Nisuin Oisa. Why did you say shining Nisuin Dida, Nisuin Davia? Even if Yud makes Nisuin, but since it's her doing it, that shouldn't stop him from still being able to sell her after that. Zok to Gemara, there's a very big difference between the mechanics of why Erison prevents him from selling her versus Nisuin. Hi Mai, Bishlam Erison shiny. The Erison that he does will disqualify him from being able to sell, because that's what the pasuk says. Bevig deba. Once he gave her over to Kiddushin, he can no longer sell her. But if she gave herself over to Kiddushin, it's simple to understand that of course he can sell her, because he never gave her over for Kiddushin. Nisuin, that takes her out of the Rishus Ha'av, we don't learn it from Bevig deba. We learn it from a different pasuk that Nisuin is a woman who's Nisua is automatically out of her father's Rishus. It's not only because he did something to her. Once she's in the status of Nusua, that status, no matter who got her into that status, totally removes her from her father's control. So element Nisuin, me shiny. And now we have our final raya. Our raya is that it must be that Yiud Eris and Oisa, because after a case of Yiud, the Brisa still discusses that the father can sell her as an almana l'kohen gadol, and it's not Nisuin Oisa, because if it was Nisuin Oisa, then the father wouldn't be able to sell her at all once she had Nisuin. And with that, we've completed our raya that Yiud Eris and Oisa and not Nisuin Oisa. Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak, the Amar Afilu the Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, Mois Harishadus l'Kiddushin itnu. We're soon going to delve in to this Chiddush of Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, how it works, how Yiud works. But the way Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak understood Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda is that Yiud is not him being moichel the avdus, and that's the currency with which he's making the Kiddushin. Rather, it is the original money that the father gave her. So that means by Yiud as well, it's the father marrying her off. So if it's the father marrying her off, then we're back to square one. How are we going to understand this Brisa? How could he sell her after he already married her off? He cannot sell her after he married her off. So b'mayim mukim, how will he understand this Brisa that we said v'shavin shemoicha almana l'kohen gadol? Zok Gemara, you know how we'll learn? Mukim lo Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar l'shivchus achashivchus hudlei motzi ma'azbin lo. He'll learn this Brisa like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer learned b'vogdeba. When can't you sell her? That's if you had already sold her once. Not b'vigdeba. If you married her off once, that doesn't disqualify you from selling her. The only thing that disqualifies you from selling her is if you sold her once. Okay, gewaltig. But shivchas acher ishus, he could sell her. Beautiful. Now we have a whole new shaila. So we finished the shaila of Yiud Eres Noisa, or Yiud Nisu Noisa. We've concluded that Yiud Eres Noisa. Now we're going to get into a new shaila. Boirish Lakish, Ma'u Shemiyayid Adam Livnoi Katan. Yiud normally would be either the Adon marrying her or he could have his child marry her. What if his son is a cut? Could he make Yiud? Could he say, listen, I'm a 45-year-old guy. I'm going to marry a 7-year-old girl. I have a 9-year-old boy. I bought a 7-year-old girl. Lama macha nashida. They could grow up together. Would that be possible? Zaktimara, do you say B'noi Amar Rachmana, Dim Livnoi Yadena, B'noi Kaldu, whoever the son is, whether he's a gadol, whether he's a cotton, the Torah doesn't specify, so it's inclusive even of a ben cotton. The son that the Torah is including in the Lach of Yiud, it has to be similar to the father who's the Torah refers to when it talks about Yiud. That was the shayla. Let's see if we can bring a raya. It says in the pasuk Ish asher yinaf as Eshes re'eu, he gets the misa of chenek. But the Gemara darshans Ish prat lekatan. If a cotton does nus, the cotton does not get misa. Ish prat lekatan. Asher yinaf as Eshes ish prat le'eshes cotton. And the Eshes cotton, we don't view that as ethos. And therefore, someone who's mezana with an Eshes cotton will not be chayiv misa. Break the Gemara. V'im amrit miyayid. If you're going to say that the yield of a cotton works, im kein matzino ishish lekotton. So how could you say asher yinaf prat leishes cotton? Why prat leishes cotton? It's a perfectly good marriage. Yield would create a perfectly good marriage midaraisa. Dr. Mara, I think you're looking at this from the wrong angle. Velamai. So what do you want to argue? Eine miyayid. You're going to learn. The Torah says asher yinaf is eshes ish, to say an eshes cotton you're not mechuyev for. Why? Because Yiud doesn't work? Well, then, if Yiud doesn't work, that means there is no instance at all of a cotton being married. If there's no instance at all of a cotton being married, amai kamamayit lekra. Why would the Torah need to tell you that an Eshes cotton is not mechuyev misa? Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that this nus of an Eshes cotton does not have a chiv misa? Why in the world would it make a chiv misa? There's no such thing as an Eshes cotton. So why would I need to be memayit an Eshes cotton from misa if there is no such thing? So adarabah, from the fact that the Torah says prat leishes cotton, the Torah right there is telling us that there is such a thing as Eshes cotton. Where in the world could you possibly find an Eshes cotton? Yiud is the answer. Tifshet mina demiyayit. Dr. Gemara, now you don't have a raya that Yiud works for a cotton. I'm going to find you another way where you'll find a cotton's marriage is a marriage. And it's the other marriage that the Torah is referring to where it said prat leishes cotton. Amar Vashi, you know where you can have the marriage of a cotton? Hacha b'yavim ben teisha shanim v'yemechad. You have a yavam who's already 9 years old, so his bia is technically a bia, but he's still not an adult. Habal yavimtai. We know that even if somebody falls on a yavama, he still is kohen her because you don't need any type of das when it comes to being kohen a yavama. So a yavam ben teisha shanim, he's a cotton, he doesn't have das, but you don't need das. And if he was bal yavimtai, he will be koiner. The midayraisa calls you late. Midayraisa, this is considered his wife. Rashi, who Tosfos argues upon vehemently, but Rashi says it's actually a dayraisa marriage, and he's koiner her that he'll even be yarshin. He'll yarshin her if she dies as a cotton. So ma'u the tema, even the midayraisa chazilei. Since midayraisa, this bia is koiner, this woman. So now it's ishtai. It's a eshes cotton. Biyase bia. So therefore, maybe maybe you would say that since she's legally married to this cotton, she's an Eshes cotton, maybe she should be mechuyev misa, and if someone is bala, the man who's bala should be mechuyev misa, kamash malam, that prat leishes cotton. So you have an Eshes cotton, but the Eshes cotton will not trigger a chiv misa. But you can't bring a raya that Yiud works for the cotton. So Zaktimar Mahavala. So this is a nice shaila that bounced around. Did we ever resolve this shaila? What happened? Zok Gemara Toshma. Amar Rab Ivoy, Amar Rab Yanich. Ein Yiud ela begadol. So he paskined quite clearly that Yiud only applies by a gadol, but he actually said something else in the clause. Ein Yiud ela midas. Yiud only works if there's das, which obviously a cotton does not have das. So the Gemara asks Tarti, why would I need Rabbi Yanai to say the same thought 2 times, but with a different twist? Zok Gemara matam kamar. He was just trying to explain the reasoning behind this psak of ein Yiud ela begadol. Matam ein Yiud ela begadol, livisha ein Yiud ela midas. Because you need das. That is the reasoning why there is no Yiud for a cotton. V'boy or maybe when Rabbi Ivoy Amar Rabbi Yanai said ein Yiud ela midas, it's talking about a completely separate halacha, and it's not speaking about the das of the person making the Yiud. So ein Yiud b'kot, nothing to do with das. But ein Yiud ela midas, my midas midas tida. You cannot make Yiud unless she's willing. Maybe that's the Kiddush. I'm sorry? In the Chanami. But she has to be willing. She has to be part of it. So you're touching on the main crux of what's going on over here. How does this das work if in fact she doesn't have das? So let me just finish the next couple of lines, and I'm going to have to get involved in something that it was inevitable that we were going to have to talk about, because we're talking here about these katanas doing things. Where is the das over here? The Gemara is going to introduce soon a case where a father who tells his daughter who's a katana, you can go be makabel Kiddushin for yourself. She could. Where's her das? So that is precisely what today's sugya. Today's sugya is not a daf yomi sugya. It's a Rosh Hashivas type of sugya. I'm shot in the Gemara. I needed the stipler. Normally, I can settle for an art scroll, but I needed the stipler just to understand the types of the Gemara. And it's precisely this problem that we're going to deal with: is how could the das of a cotton work? A cotton doesn't have das. So exactly what you're touching on. The boy sema my midas tida. To tell me Abaya Bereder Abavo, Asher lo ya'ada. It says Asher lo ya'ada. Melamed shetzarich liya'ada. He has to let her know what's going on. So this doesn't necessarily mean a das of kinyan, which she doesn't have, but she still needs to know what's going on. Awareness. And that maybe she could have. So we're going to be twisting ourselves into a pretzel about what type of das she does have versus what type of das she doesn't have, because that's what the sugi is. Okay, who tani la, who amar la, the Kiddushin Yiud. We're talking about Kiddushin Yiud, v'aliba de Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. As Rashi says, who tani la masnisin. He was the one who learned in the Mishnah. V'hu amar be'minavsha, and he explained it. The high timer, the tzarich liyada, he explains the brisa that says that you need das. So it's when he said, when Rabbi Yanai said, and Yiud el begadol, and the ein Yiud el midas, so he was the one who said that it has to be midas, or maybe the Tani Abaye B'Rava. I'm sorry, we're focused on a brisa that Abaye Bereder Abavo quoted Asher lo ya'ada melam shich tzarich liyada. And he gave a reasoning why she needs das. You know why she needs das? Who tani lavu amar la the Kiddushin Yiud v'aliba de Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda the amar moish rishonis lav l'Kiddushin. Let's think about it. If the father is the one who's the person who's giving her l'Kiddushin, because it's the original money that was paid to the father by the other when he purchased her, so why does she need das? He's the player. She's not the player. Why does she need das? Zokt Abaye Bereder Bavo, because this brisa that says she needs das holds that the Moish Kiddushin is given to her later on, which is the other giving up that malacha. That's her already. She's the one driving the bus now. She's the one in control. So if she's in control, she needs to have das. Again, she can't have the sophisticated das of being makna herself, but she has to have awareness. The question is, and that's what we're going to have to discuss, how does this work by Yiud? How does it work for you? She doesn't have the sophisticated das to be makna herself to him. So how does it work? That is going to be the main problem that we have to solve today. But she needs to have awareness, and whatever awareness she has, it's good enough. But why is awareness good enough? You need a makna, right? And the father's not in the picture here. So that is the problem that we need to deal with. So the positive shot you could say is that is the Gzeres HaKosef of Yiud. The reason why that's going to be a problem is because the Gemara is going to draw a parallel between Yiud in the moment and Stamazoi, a father telling a town that you can be Mekabel Kiddushin. There you don't have the Kiddush of Yiud. But how is it going to work over there? So you touched on Mamish, what the whole focus of the Sugi is. The Rishonim talk about it, the Achronim talk about it. But let's see what Rashi says over here. Who told Misnisin? Who Amar B'Minavshi? He explained why she needs das. The high time with Aitzarech Liyado, it's Rabbi Yosy Yehudahi, Damar Moishe Rishoni Shekibul Av was Lav L'Kedushin. So where is the Yiud? Where's the Kesef Kedushin of Yiud? Then Yiud El Bepruta Shalel, the pruta that she owes him, because he's giving it to her, not to the father. Lefichach Ein Das Av Bohen Mitchila. The Das Av will not be here involved in the Kedushin, because there is no Das of the Av regarding her malacha. And therefore, if he doesn't tell this girl that he's being Mekadosh now, there won't be a Kedushin. Gewaltig. Rab Nachman Yitzchak Omar. So if you remember at the top of the Amid, we said that there was somebody who argues on how we understand Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, and namely Rab Nachman Yitzchak, and he says, Afilu Tema L'Kiddushin, even if you hold that Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda holds that the Moshe Rishonis was L'Kiddushin, and if it was L'Kedushin, it's the father who's the player. So if the father's a player, why do we need her das? Dr. Nachman bar Yitzchak, you will still need das, according to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, K'shayni hacha, the Omer Rachman Yada. It's a Gzeres HaKosef. It's the father that's being Mekabel the Kedushin. But there's a Gzeres HaKosef, Asher Lo Yada, that she needs to be aware. It's a Gzeres HaKosef that by Yiud, the girl needs to be aware. My Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, we've talked about Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda so much today. According to him, she's making the Kiddushin something later, but we never heard Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda himself expressing what he said. So now we'll finally be introduced to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. The Tanya, it says, Asher lo yada vehefta. He learns, Tzarech sheyeh shos b'yoim k'dei p'tiyah. Since it's him being moichel, the remaining avodah that's due to him, that's the Kesef Kedushin, well, then there has to be remaining avodah that it's at least worth Shavapruta, because he has to give her Shavapruta. If it was the money he gave her originally, well, there's a lot of money involved when he purchased her. But if that's not the Moshe Kedushin, it's the currency that he's giving her now by being moichel her avodah, that there's got to be at least a Shavapruta of avodah that's still owed to him. Otherwise, she's not being Mekadosh with a Shavapruta. So all Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda said was, there has to be enough that there will be at least a pruta remaining. That's all he said. And from there we built up, it must be that the Moish Kedushin isn't the original kesef that the Adon gave to the father. It must be that he's being Mekadosher with being Moichel, the remaining Shibu that she has to him. If there's enough time left, let's say it's the last day of her contract, and he wants the last day of those 6 years, and he wants to be Mekadosher, if there's still a Shava Pruta of Avoida there available, then it'll be Go Kiddushin, them Lav in Mukadeshes, and that's where we got this whole Kiddush in Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, Al Makasavi Marish Rishonis, Lav L'Kedushin. So basically, Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda never said Moshe Rishonis Lav L'Kedushin. All he said is that Yiud only works if there's at least a Shava Pruta of work remaining. From there, we built a whole Yosod that we blamed on Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, is that he must hold that it's the avodah remaining that is the Kesef Kedushin. But Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak said no such thing. As we learned twice already today, Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak disputes that. And he says, no, afilu tema l'Kiddushin itnu. Rab Yosy bar Yehuda holds just like everybody else, that the Kesef Kedushin is the money that was originally given to the father. So you're going to ask, if that's the most Kedushin, who cares if there's a Shava Pruta remaining? It's completely irrelevant, because when he bought her, he gave her plenty of money to make a Kiddushin. You're right. But Shiny Hakadam, it's just a Gzeres HaKosef. Maybe Rabbi Yosy is not changing the whole lumpness of Yiud. He just thinks there happens to be exercise kosev that you cannot be miyayid a woman if there's not at least a shavar pruta remaining. Because of the word v'hafta, you have to redeem her, right? So there has to be something left with which you could redeem. So it's just exercise kosev. Correct. But it's exercise kosev the Yiud, you could only be miyayid up until the point where there's something left. Exercise kosev. Exercise kosev. Shiny hacha. The ksiv lashon yada l'midrash lashon deya and yada v'hafta ve'en yidel b'makim pediya. Kim bali yida b'soif sheish tzarich sheyeh toast b'yoyim kim tavei l'cheshbon gerayna the aleh girayin shal pruta. That's what everything we do. Now the question is why. So the conventional wisdom was it must be that's the most Kiddushin. But Nachman says no, don't build tightness over here. Same, it's just exercise kosev. Just like you said a moment ago, it could be exercise kosev that you have to know about it. He could say it's exercise kosev that there has to be stuff left. Beautiful. So that is the famous Rabbi Yosy Yiud. Now we're going to get into this idea of a ketana being able to be mekabel Kiddushin for herself. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman. Omer Adam lebita ketana. A Persian can tell his daughter who's a ketana, Sei, the kibli kiddushayach, go be mekabel Kiddushin, and then this ketana can go be mekabel her own Kiddushin. How do you know this? It's a huge chiddush. Midi Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, from Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda's understanding of how Yiud works. Lav Amar Rabbi Yosy bar Rabbi Yehuda. Didn't Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda say Mois harishonos lav lekedushin didn't? He said that the original money that the Adon gave the Av was not for Kiddushin. And the Kiddushin is happening later on with him being Moichel, her remaining Avodah. V'chimishayirba shava pruta have a Kiddushin. So why should this be any different? Hakanami loishna. Just like by Yiud, the father basically is letting the daughter marry herself off. So forget Yiud. In a regular conventional case, a father can tell a Tana be Makabel Kiddushin for yourself. So Frank Shloimi, what's the connection? By Yiud, I have the Xeris Kosev of the Torah. Tell me that it works. By Kiddushin could work. She doesn't have Das. Where's the Das? Where's the Makabel? She doesn't have Yat to be Makabel. So the whole thing doesn't begin. And all of the Rishonim struggle with it. So I just want to read the first couple of kashas that the Stipler asks on it. I mean, we can't learn the whole shtickle Stipler, but I want to learn at least how he understands Tosfos. So right away, the Stipler asks the following question on this sugya, and we need to open it up because this is completely sealed. It's understanding. So he quotes the Gemara, Tziva Kabbalah Kiddushaych, works with Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. V'tzarech bir, Frank the Stipler. Hechi mahani my sabas. Exactly how is it working? What's the lumdus? What's the mechanics here? In mikoyach atzma, if you're telling me that she will have her own koyach to marry herself off, ha'in ma'aseh ketana klum, right? V'im mikoyach aviyah, and if it's her father doing it, well, so what is she doing? She's a shliach of her father. Ha'in kat nasa shliach, so she can't be a shliach either. So this, the basics don't make any sense here. How does this work? V'nemru bezeh kama shitos l'rishonim. There's a whole bunch of shitos of how you look at it. I'm just going to run through some ideas that we're not going to stick with because I want to stick with Tosfos. So he says from the Rosh that says that it works out shlichus. I ain't shlichus lakatan. Hacha shakesev kedusheh la'atzma, since she's keeping her own kesef. Vashlichus hu l'teivaso l'skusa, and the shlichus is good for her. Gam ketan and nasu shliach. A ketana could also be a shliach. Umekabelas hakadushin mishlichus aviyah. A little bit, it's hard to understand. Since it's good for her and she's getting to keep the money, so therefore it works. It's a new shlichus. Again, these are all things that it doesn't make sense. It's hard. It makes sense. It's hard for us to understand. You have to run the Ravid. I want to focus on Tosfos. So let's see Tosfos. There's no Rashi over here. There's actually a little bit of Rashi. So let's look at Rashi. Rashi's on Amud Beis, and then we'll have to see Tosfos because otherwise I don't even know where to start. So what does Tosfos say? Rashi say on the top of Amud Beis? Have a Kiddushin. Alma, you see from here, since when he originally sold her, the idea when he sold her, at that time he knew that there's a definite possibility that this is going to lead to a marriage. Right? The Adon has a right to marry Afman. Therefore, we say midai tehava. So his das is still there for the Kiddushin. So now Rashi is opening up a little bit for us what the mechanics is. The mechanics is the father. Just like by Yiud, the father's Daas can work to make this Kiddushin work because he condoned it when he sold her. Well, then by him telling her outright, I condone your marriage, that will also be considered his Daas. But you still have a problem. How could she be the shliach, right? The fact is, he's not doing it, she's doing it. How would it work? The Stipler asks, even if you would understand it by Yiud, there's a Kiddush of Yiud. Who said that would work by regular Kiddush? So because of that, I want to look at Tosfos. We're running late already, but otherwise, what's the taich of the Gemara? What is the taich? So Tosfos asks, I don't understand. What is the whole Kiddush over here? What is the whole Kiddush over here? Tosfos asks. Don't we have the din of Arev? Doesn't every father have a right to say, give money leploini, and my daughter will be Mekudeshes to you? So what is the whole Kiddush? It's very, very posh. Yield, and when he tells his daughter to be Mekabel Kesef, I can tell a guy to do anything. So it's as if the father told the potential husband, give the little girl money and you'll be Mekadesh, and he's the Makna. So why is this a big Kiddush? The Gemara makes it sound like we just discovered America from Yiud. This is basics, right? That's the Dinarav. So that's Tosfos' Kasha. And Kos again, from a Labita, if I say you can give money to any ploini, I accept it as a Kiddushin. Surely if you're giving it to my own daughter, it would be as if I'm very happy with that. So Midinarav it should work. That's Tosfos' Kasha. Zok Tosfos, maybe Arav wouldn't work here. Why wouldn't Arav work here? The Hachal Shaykh didn't Arvis, the Allah Dibur the Mekadesh. He didn't speak to the Mekadesh. He told his daughter, go be Mekabel Kiddushin. I never told the husband, give my daughter money and she'll be Mekadesh to you. So maybe our Arav doesn't work here because you didn't speak to the guy. So it doesn't work. But that's the case of Tosfos. If Kain Rabbi Yosy ben Yehuda, the Amr de Mekudeshes, but Pruta Achroina, according to Rabbi Yosy ben Yehuda, it works. Atu Neilef Minah. So what are we saying? He didn't tell the husband anything. According to the way we're learning, that he didn't tell him anything. So are you going to suggest that we could learn from Yiud? Atu Neilef Minah. Dim loyam merklum, loy lebas, v'loy lemakadesh. In the case of Yiud, he didn't instruct the daughter, and he didn't instruct the Mekadesh. So if you're going to learn this from Yiud, why did he even have to tell the daughter to be Mekabel Kiddushin? The Torah should just say, if a girl's Mekabel Kiddushin, it works. You know it from Yiud, because the father didn't instruct the husband, and he didn't instruct the daughter. So once you're saying you could, first of all, how could you learn from Yiud? But even if you can learn from Yiud, well, then learn without any instructions, it works. Because by Yiud, there are no instructions. That was when he sold her. Oh, okay. So that's what Tosfos. The loy have a loy karmer loy, the loy karmer law. In fact, it's not like he told him or her, and therefore there's no Aravis here. This is what the raya from Yiud is. Al korach katana yesh lo yad lekabel kedushin. The katana must have a yad to be mekabel kedushin. Be the achchil gabe Yiud the amar achmana shetiyayid al yidei atzma. Since the Torah said by Yiud she could accept her own kedushin, it must be that she has some type of yad. If there was no way that a girl could be makabel her own kedushin, the Torah would never have made Yiud. So Dr. Yiud is such a big chiddush, the Torah wouldn't make such a wild gzeres hakosov that a tana has no yad whatsoever, her kedushin works. It must be that with his permission, with her father's permission, she has a pashtikal yad, because otherwise, she a moyel le'inyan Yiud. So that's question number one, which needs beer. And then question number two, there's another problem. How is she even kind? So besides the fact of her das for Kiddushin, which we're going to have to get shot in, but how could she physically accept something if she's a ktana? So for that, Tosfos says that with a das acheres makna, since he's giving it to her, she'll be able to be kind. But now we have to figure out what is going on here. What are we learning from Yiud? So I just want to quickly learn how he explains Tosfos, because the Stipler he explains things with such clarity that it takes a mumble jumble and confusion and literally makes building blocks out of it. But Tosfos says Yon Biru the Yiud leka amir sa'av levitai tzivi kibli kedeshai. By Yiud there was no one giving instructions. He didn't instruct her to do anything. And he didn't speak to that neither, instructing him, we don't have that. Right? That's how Tosfos diffuses the question, why isn't this Orb? It's not Orb because no instructions were given. By Orb, I gave instructions. We also know that Yiud works for Gzeres HaKosov. And the Gemara is saying, from that Gzeres HaKosov of Yiud, this is what Tosfos says. It must be from Yiud that Ketana yesh lo yad lekabel Kiddushin. She must have some yad to be able to be Makabel Kiddushin. Mida ashchen gabe Yiud, the Omer Achmana shetis yad al deyatzim. It must be that she has some koyach, and you see that from Yiud. If it wouldn't help for a Ketana to be Makabel Kiddushin when she has expressed permission from her father to do so, there's no way the Torah would have made up Yiud. In fact, the disciple of Mechdesa, but Tzarech Bir, the Ma'akashi is soy din Yiud Chiddushin Migzeres HaKosov. Yiud is a Chiddush to Gzeres HaKosov. V'leka hasam midin oimer adam levitoi. There's no oimer adam levitoi there. He didn't tell his daughter anything. So practice disciple, I don't understand Tosfos. Heichli alfinim mizeh din oimer adam levitoi. Dilma koil Gzeres HaKosov Yiud. The whole Yiud can be one big Gzeres HaKosov, and you can't build or learn anything from there. So the disciple is saying is, if you want to speak to the Titans, you can go to the Avnei Malum. But I'm going to offer my shtickle, and you'll see the Bar Mitzvah Bochum are going to use my shtickle, not the Avnei Malum shtickle. One of the reasons why I have to learn the Sefer is because when I bought the Sefer Kiddushin Yaakov, so the disciple was not alive anymore, his daughter was selling it. And his daughters, they would not sell the Sefer unless you promised that you were going to learn it. So I outright lied to her and I told her I'm going to learn the whole set and I want to buy it. And I didn't have any intention whatsoever to ever learn it. When am I going to learn it? But now Hashem said, now you're going to learn it. So now every time I have a little difficulty, the disciple always makes it perfect. So I'm afraid I didn't lie. I just didn't know that. Okay. V'nira bir, divrei HaTosfos. Actually, the truth is I didn't intend to learn it because every Shiva Bacher buys 1 billion Svarim because he's convinced he'll need them. And all those Svarim are still rotting on my shelf. Those Svarim that I need that I couldn't live without. Right? And my kids won't use them. My son tells me those are museum pieces. These aren't Svarim. My son said, I need an Avnei Malum. I said, I have one. He said, well, you don't have one. You have a museum piece. It could be the Xavier of the Avnei Malum himself. I need something that I can read. The Nira, Beer, Divrei HaTosfos. The Bechol Kinyanim, by every Kinyan, Hatzarech Shnei Dvarim. Every Kinyan requires 2 components. Das Bailam Lahaknois, Umaisa Kinyan. It needs 2 things. You need Das Bailam to be Makta, but you also need the physical action that creates the Kinyan. You can't just do it telepathically. You have to have Kavanah, but you got to do something. Kinyan Mashiach, Kinyan Akbar, whatever you got to do. The Gabi Yiud Chazinon, the Ein Tzarech Das Ha'av Lahaknois. By Yiud, we don't need the Das Ha'av to be Makna because we could rely on the daughter's Das. The Ha Miyayid Bal Korchesh Alav. First of all, we know we don't need the father's agreement because Yiud works even if the father doesn't want. The Gam Afilu Imitchila Hisne Almanash Lo Yayid Ain't No Klum. The Havali Mastal Mashakos of Torah. The Kaimalon Kabran Rabbeir. So Yiud works against the Das of the father. So clearly you don't need his Das. You don't need his agreement here. Then Kain Chazinon the Gzeres HaKosov Shein Tzorech B'Yiud Das Makna. So maybe the whole Gzeres HaKosov that you have by Yiud is only on component A. On the Das Makna is not required. But you still need component B. Aval HaKolponim, Ha Mia Chazinin Rabbi Yosy B'Rav Yehuda, the Tzorech Ma'aseh Kinyan. You do need a Kinyan here, and you see that from Rabbi Yosy B'Rav Yehuda because he says if there's not enough money left in the account, it won't work. Why? There's no Das. Das is not relevant because there's no Ma'aseh Kinyan. She shows b'yoyim shavapruta v'yimcha lo hashivud l'shem kesef kedushin. Alma the tzarech al kolponim kini kesef kedushin. So even though you don't need das makna here, but you do need a ma'aseh kedushin. The hashda heichi mahani masher moichel lo liyoitz kesef kedushin. How could the other's forgiving of the work that's still owing to him? How could that be a ma'aseh kedushin? Haloy kesef kedushin tzarech litin la'av shahu hu abaylim shalabas li kedushin. How does forgiving her create a Ma'aseh Kiddushin if the father's receiving nothing and he is the one who's the seller? How does it help that he's giving her something by not enforcing her work requirements. It's like going and giving Kiddushin to a third party and expecting her to be Mukadeshes. I'm giving it to her, but the father's the seller. How does that work? And V'lo Savri Hatoisvis, the Mechilas Hashibud, Havak and Nesinas Kesef Lav. Don't say that it's like Nesinas Kesef Lav, because he's not giving it to the father, he's giving it to the daughter, but that itself is something that the Rishonim wanted to talk about. Some of the Rishonim learned that he's actually, by him being Melech L'Shibud, it's him giving something to the father. But Tosfos doesn't have that shita. And he says, V'yesh L'Palpal, we can discuss it, but let's move on. So what is the Chiddush that we learn from Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda in what Yiud teaches us? The Shaper Michsheva Maisa Kinyan L'Kedushin Kin Shenoisin Labas Atzmo Kesef. The Chiddush is that it's considered a Maisa Kinyan by giving the daughter the money. Shafal Pisha Bailim Lekacha Hua'av. Even though the Baldover here is the father, Mikomokim Gufa Miskadeshes, the product, Huabas. And the Chiddush is the Sogil Lekadushin Kishakesef Nitin Legufa Miskadish Veloy Lezeh Shehu Abailim Lekacha Tainuav. That is the Chiddush of Yiud. That a Maisa Kedushin is not only giving kesef to the owner, it's also giving it to the product. And that is what we learn from Yiud. And that's all we learn from Yiud. We don't learn anything about Daas. Zokt, Mr. Stapler, Ulafizeh, Gam Kol Kedusha Ktana, you could learn every Kedushin of Ktana, it's considered a Maisa Kedushin if she's receiving it. Nuchal Ilmoich in the Sinsa Kesef Labas Atzma, who Maisa Kinyan, Hamoy Kedushin. Ella, the Bechol Kedusha Ktana, Hatzarch Das Lahakmas. But all other Kedushin, you need Das Lahakmas. Only Yiud waives that requirement. That's the Chiddush of Yiud. But Kedusha Ktana, of course, requires Das Lahakmas. They have Bailim Lahaknos who have. Whose Das Aknod you need when you're marrying off a child? It's the father. If the father says, I'm not going to be maknav, I get the cash in my hand, of course it wouldn't help if he gives it to the bas, not because it's not a Maisa Kedushin, but you don't have the agreement of the father. But if the father says, I'm happy with that, so now you have the das makna. The kfar ika akna mitzarav, all we need is a Maisa, Kaper anu l'medim miyud, shenizin zaketz of lebas atzma, shiguva miskadeshes, have a Maisa kinyan ma'al l'kedushin. So the beautiful thing about the Stipler is he breaks it down into pieces. There's two components that a kedusha needs. It needs the das makna, which is the father, that can only come from the father, and there's a chiddush by Yiud that you don't need the father's will; it goes against the father's will, and that's exclusive to Yiud. But the parsha of Yiud does not address the Maisa Kedushin. You still have to have a Maisa Kedushin. The Maisa Kedushin you would normally assume is only if the seller is acquiring that money. From Yiud we see it's enough if the product acquires the money. That's called the Maisa Kedushin, as long as there's Das there. So in the case of our Gemara, where the Gemara wants to compare Yiud to someone who told his daughter who's a Tana, Seiv the Kibli, Kiddushayich, Zokt the Heilige Gemara, there you have the father's agreement, because he told her Seiv the Kibli Kiddushayich. But we see from Yiud that her accepting it, she's the subject, she's the product, not the father himself. That's considered a Maisa Kedushin. That's what he said. So we're over. We've been over the time. But what was I supposed to do? It's a Pashut Pshat. So I had no choice. So we'll catch up. There's more action here. We'll catch up in Mitzvah on Shabbos. We'll learn a blot and a half on Shabbos. I'll have to push hard. I really was trying to figure out a way to do this, but without the